Bam. Robert, I look. I don't want to say. I don't want to spin it that I got it more right than wrong. I said they weren't going to dismiss the charges. The Judge McAfee was not going to dismiss the indictment. He had to disqualify both, and he somehow went with a combination that makes absolutely no sense on its face logically, and even less sense if you read the decision, unless he was threatened or whatever, and he said, look, I cannot get rid of Fani Willis, but I'm going to make it so that she will be gotten rid of through other means. I don't need to recap it for anybody who's out there. If you don't know what's going on, then my goodness, you're new to the channel like tonight. Fani Willis not disqualified from the prosecution of the RICO charges against Trump, Roman, et al., but she had to make a hard decision, pun intended, to boot Nathan Wade from the file or disqualify herself and her whole office. She didn't have to wait long, Nathan Wade, because democracy and justice are their North Star. He tendered his resignation within hours of Scott McAfee's decision in a resignation letter that everyone who saw him testify knows he did not draft himself. My only question was it Kamala Harris who drafted it or her communications team? Sure as hell wasn't Kamala Harris. Was it Fani Willis's team? Who knows? The judge split the baby, and I say in so splitting the baby of justice, he killed the baby of justice. It's still a net positive unequivocally for Trump. Fani Willis staying on this case, given what Judge McAfee said about her in the decision, no one's going to take her seriously, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. And what do you think?
Basically, Judge McAfee kicked Nathan Wade out of bed with Fani Willis, and he hopped into bed with her instead. And that was, in my view, ill-advised. My theory was, at the very beginning, I was skeptical he would do anything due to my skepticism of the Fulton County Courthouse, whose notorious political partisan corruption is the only reason this case or anything related to January 6th even ever happened. For those who don't remember, the only election contest President Trump brought in court was in Georgia. That was the only state. None of the other cases or the rest were an election contest case. The only one he brought was in Georgia. It was detailed with hundreds and hundreds of pages of declarations and sworn testimony and investigative research, detailed aspects of law. I know about it because I didn't bring that particular election contest, but I was part of crafting and drafting the whole thing leading up to it. I left the case when it became clear they were going to let some other people run it, and I didn't have confidence in how they would handle it, and given a bunch of them ended up indicted, I guess my instincts were okay on that. But it was the Fulton County court system that corruptly violated the state law and refused to schedule a hearing, even though state law required a hearing within 5 days of it being brought. And that's the only reason why Georgia never got fully adjudicated. The reason why Georgia's impact on the rest of the states never got fully adjudicated. The reason why January 6th could even happen in the first place. The only reason that there was any alternate elector program in Georgia at all for even it to occur. So it's the corruption of the Fulton County court system that we're even here. So depending on the same Fulton County court system to take action when they could see corruption by the prosecutor plainly in view was probably a bridge too far. Now, I changed my view 2/3 the way through because the scale and scope of the corruption was compounded by perjury, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering by the prosecutor herself in front of this very judge that the whole world got to witness. So in order for the judge to allow her to stay on the case required he not only be without a conscience as to the concerns about the law, to have no constitutional conscience, it required, and no character, it also required he be politically inept, that he be so dumb, politically out of it, that he not recognize that leaving her on would do irreparable damage to the integrity and the appearance of integrity in the judiciary itself. And that's the only place I was wrong. I thought his political IQ wasn't that low. Most people know don't hop into bed with Fani Willis. But he did. And it shows that there's no depth. I mean, when I was first in Georgia, on behalf of President Trump, who called me from the White House to go down there, in 2020, my first statement to the members on our locals board was that they're the biggest bunch of cowards I'd ever met, the Republican Party hierarchy in Georgia. And that's where McAfee comes from. He comes from the Perdue Kemp political operation. I mean, Sonny Perdue, who Trump made ag secretary, which was one of his terrible decisions for cabinet. I mean, Sonny Perdue, imagine Boss Hogg, but dumber. And that's Sonny Perdue. Even looks like, I was sitting there looking across from him like, this guy can't be that dumb. It's like, oh, usually your corrupt people are smart. He's corrupt and stupid. And so was his nitwit senator relative. I mean, both of them lost because they refused. All they needed to do was say they would stop trading in stocks and making a bunch of money on inside information while they're senators. And both of them, Loeffler and Perdue, refused. That's why they lost. Of course, the Republican establishment there in Georgia blamed Trump for that. That's how stupid they are. But that's who McAfee is. And now I think what the entire judicial system underappreciates is some of us who have been in the weeds, in the trenches of political cases for a quarter century, like I have witnessed this all the time. The political corruption, the political cowardice of many of our jurists and judges in judicial system, as well as the almost inestimable corruption of our prosecutorial branch of power. The ordinary person in America has not. 95% of Americans never experienced the criminal justice system vicariously or directly. The difference is now this is all being broadcast to the whole world. And everybody's seeing an up-close view of our criminal justice and civil justice systems. And they're shocked at what they're witnessing because these judges who are accustomed to weaponizing their power and punishing the dissident outsider on behalf of corrupt insiders don't realize that the only reason they've been getting away with it is nobody who cared noticed. They weren't doing it to the leading candidate for the presidency of the United States of America. And these dimwits don't realize that. They've always got away with it in the past. This is a disaster for the state of Georgia, disaster for the Fulton County Courthouse, a disaster for the American justice system that looks like a joke because right now it is one.
Now, I'll try to steelman one thing for Scott McAfee. Set aside the question of dignity and reputation, which I think he's shredded his own. The argument could be made, what's the benefit of booting Fani Willis from the file as opposed to excoriating her in the decision and leaving her in? You boot her from the file, you appoint another DA, they'll say it comes from a more red-leaning district. That's
the problem. The issue is no other DA would have taken the case.
Well, but then
because the way it would have gone is her whole office would have been disqualified. And that's what he skipped over. He applied the legal standard for line prosecutors having a conflict that wasn't the boss. When the boss he has to disqualify not just the special prosecutor, the whole office. And so once you found the special prosecutor to be disqualified, you had to disqualify the whole office. So because it was the boss that put him in charge in the first place, and it was her corruption that caused the problem. So what would have been the consequences? They would have gone to I think it's a statewide group that would have looked at it. They would have asked somebody else to take it. Nobody else would have in the whole state. And they already knew that. Mm-hmm. So it basically disqualification in this case equaled functional dismissal. And I think that's part of what the judge didn't want on the hook. But I think he's accustomed. He doesn't want this full dismissal to occur. He granted partial dismissal early in the week. And then he was out doing press interviews about the case, which he's never been doing.
Okay. I thought that was bizarre.
And somehow Megyn Kelly knew what his ruling was the day before. So that suggests things are leaking out of his courtroom. So this is a judge who's politically aware enough to talk to the press, politically aware enough to leak to the press, but not politically aware enough to realize he just made himself a laughingstock in the entire Georgia judicial system, a laughingstock of justice around the world. We're not going to be able to lecture anybody anywhere about a justice or legal system. Rule of law, what a crock. We're not applying it at all. This is a prosecutor who went into a courtroom and committed perjury in front of this judge, and this judge did nothing of consequence about it.
Let me ask you this, again, to steelman it. there were people who were suggesting, and I don't know if it's true, that if he did disqualify her from this case, it would prejudice other prosecutions that she's working on. Do you know? Is that the case?
Because the conflict applied specifically and solely to this case.
That's what I was. Okay, I don't feel comfortable enough with my own answer.
Those are people that think sometimes if you have a systemic institutional problem, it applies. Like the lab is bad, or a cop has been, framing people. My view on that, by the way, is if that's a problem you have, then everybody should get new trials. Okay, so it's like I don't consider that a terrible thing. It's like, oh, golly gee, other people who got railroaded now get a chance not to be railroaded. Why is that a bad thing? That's your authoritarians on the right talking. People like the dear general there decided to take the law in his own hands and help assassinate a president of the United States. So those are dangerous people when it comes to power. But in that same, we were seeing a sort of comedic version of it with Spies Like Us this weekend was the Saturday movie at Viva Locals.com. And another, and they asked the general at one point, would you risk all human life on the planet for this? And he said, for the American way of life, I would. Right. There's an aspect of that, the absurdity of that's true with these kind of people. But no, it wasn't the case here. The only impact of this would mean the case was dead against Trump. And the judge clearly likes being in the limelight, doing TV interviews, having his decisions leaked before the decision is officially published. These are extraordinary events to occur. But he's too politically daft to realize that he just torched his own reputation. What the problem with all of these cases is they're bringing the judiciary into the corruption. They're making the judiciary culpable. They're making the judiciary a co-conspirator in interfering with an election. That's what I think Roberts and Kavanaugh understand, and is why what this decision did is it increased the probability the Supreme Court shuts it all down by using the immunity process to get there. Now, the judge federal court down in Florida might have an alternative path to get there.